Hello guys, today we are going to go through a specific scenario of GSuite authentication into Office 365. Let me explain what will you learn and what do you need this video for if you are an administrator. Let's start with the use case. A lot of companies had a chance to migrate to Google Workspace, which is now called GSuite. So they have their domains and users in the cloud with Google. In Office 365, you have Azure Active Directory, where you can also migrate your users from on-premises, or you can make a hybrid environment where you have like local Active Directory and it gets synchronized with the cloud using AD Sync. But what if you already moved your users to Google Cloud? Well, obviously, you can just go and make users inside of Office separately. So then each user would have two usernames, two passwords. Also, you could add them as guest users, but it's not as simple and you will have to do it manually for every user you add or remove. So we are going to look at the situation, how to allow GSuite users to use your Office licenses without extra usernames and extra administration. In addition to that, for those who are just learning, you will learn how to set up SAML authentication from external source into Office 365. It's done through a specific functionality called domain federation. So today we are going to walk through step-by-step setup with my explanations. And please pay attention that this federation, once set, cannot be easily adjusted. So actually, if you want to modify the properties of the federation for your domain, you want to unset it and set it again. Just keep it in mind and I'll remind it in the video. Let's get on with it. So let's start with a bit of a theory. So we have GSuite, which is a former of Google Workspace, where you have users. Let's say user 1 and user 2. And you have Microsoft Office 365. Let me use a different color. Microsoft 365 is an office. And you want the user to connect and authorize in Microsoft 365 and use the apps and licenses. For apps and licenses to work, there must be user on the side of Microsoft. So how do you make them the same user which is managed by GSuite? Well, at first, let's say that the user on Microsoft side is actually inside of Azure Active Directory. So we need to find a way to synchronize users somehow. And this synchronization is called provisioning. So we need to configure provisioning, which will create similar users inside of Azure Active Directory. So it will be the same user in terms of your actual person who logs in. Also, this user shouldn't be managed. It should be managed by administration on GSuite side. And this kind of relationship, where the user is administered by another domain but exists in this domain, is called federation. So there needs to be federation here for the domain that you use. So here we have domain that you bought and integrated with your GSuite, and it is a primary domain on GSuite, but it is a federated domain on Azure AD and Microsoft side. And finally, to be able to use this federation, there should be some kind of trust established. And the trust is done using certification. So there should be provisioning, there should be federation, and there should be certification. And it means that there is a cert, which is usually X509 type on GSuite side, and GSuite will use this so-called SAML language to authenticate with authority on Azure AD, which means that in this case GSuite is identity provider and Azure AD is service provider. That's just a bit of terminology for you. So what we actually need to do in this case, we need to also make an application app on GSuite side. So the user in Google Suite will start this app and will connect through SAML to Azure AD and give access to Office. This is how it works. So 3 steps. 1, make actual app in GSuite. Don't worry, you don't have to develop it. It's just settings, basically. And it's called SAML app. 2, make provisioning, and we'll use auto provisioning because every time there's a user we allow the app, we want this user to automatically be created on Microsoft side. And finally, we need to make federation. And when it comes to federation, please do not confuse it with external identity provider for SAML. For example, let me show you. Let's say you are inside of portal Azure.com, the Active Directory from Azure Direct portal. Let me quickly log in there. I said quickly, I have to wait for this. Okay, so here there's a setting which is called external identity provider. You can add here, even have Google, but these are not the settings you are looking for. Don't play with it. You don't want to develop your own application that will work through this interface. You want to simply use Google login to connect to Office. For that purpose, we are going to go with the federation and we'll use the PowerShell. So let's go step by step. The first step is to make the app inside of GSuite. So I will open the admin console. And if you are testing this, please make sure that you are not trying to use your private account. You need to have Workspace account. So in this case, I'm just using a trial. So if you're training, you can get a free trial and try this out. Then I'm going to apps, SAML apps. And this is where my next step would be to actually find and create the app for Microsoft. And we are lucky because if you search for Microsoft, you'll see that Google already prepared the template. Here we go. This is the Microsoft app which we want to select and have configured. Continue. These are default settings. You need to enable signed response, and you need to make sure that the name ID format is set to persistent and your basic information is mapped as a primary email for this app. So this is the name ID. You'll basically use the email of the user as ID inside of Office. And this is where we do the same. We are mapping the email, primary email, to IDP, identity provider, IDP email. Finish. All right. So then if you want some user to be able to use this app, you have to go and activate this app in the permissions. Here we go. And you could, of course, modify the different organization units, but now we are working with one domain. So we want the app to connect from this domain, and we want this domain to be federated, and app now exists. So in order for auto provisioning to work, which is the next step, we have to have this domain inside of Azure AD as well. And it needs to be added as federated domain. So let's actually go and add the domain to admin center. You have to go to the main settings. If you don't see it all, it may be collapsed like this. So you have to click show all domains. And this is where you'll go ahead and add your verified domain. Well, it's not going to be verified yet, but after you add it, there are a few steps you need to do which are very simple. If you get stuck here, you can ask in the comments, but there are many articles and actually the wizard guides you through. In my case, it's even easier. What verified means? It means that Microsoft knows that it is your domain. You are the owner. You are not some random guy adding the domain. And because it's my GoDaddy domain, so I bought it on a registrar called godaddy.com, it will automatically verify without you adding the entries. Otherwise, you have to go to DNS records and add whatever Microsoft asks you to add. Now that domain is verified, I can say, yes, it was easy to add my domain without any feedback. The next step is important. You need to set your previous domain as default. You cannot have default federated domain. And because we want to have this domain federated, we want to have it not default. Here we go. At this point, we need to go back and enable auto provisioning in the app. So just if you forgot, in the app settings itself, which is menu apps, sample apps, your Microsoft Office app, you need to click on configure after provisioning and then authorize inside of Office 365 with your account. Then it will ask you to also log in with your Google account, because why not? Maybe it will ask me for authentication, no? Okay. So, and this is an important configuration step where you need to match values from Google domain side, different kind of properties of the user with properties of the user on Azure ID side. So the most important ones are display name, which I like to be the formatted name, so it looks like your first, second name. The alias will be your mail nickname, which is not critical. On-premises immutable ID is Azure ID specific value, which is basically internal identifier. So typically you set your email value to this. All right, and then let's check. For user principal name, I also like to use email value, because this will be the username that you see, which is typically an email if you go to the active users. All right, so that's set. We are continuing. We can create a scope for other groups if you want to organize users in some way, but I'm skipping it for now. And then there is a setting. What do? We suspend, turn on app, or maybe delete the user. So for example, if a user is deleted from Google, I can say delete it after this period of time. It's funny because within 24 hours, it's not really clear how soon, but it will be as soon as possible. So that's it. So these settings will be created, but you haven't done auto provisioning yet, which means that you need to go and enable it. This setting will be enabled after you click on. And this is where you can also reconfigure the settings if you made a mistake. Now, it will take a while for synchronization to work. And there is a sync log which you can see if there are questions. And generally, you need to wait until users will appear on the Microsoft 365 side. They will. For example, you can go and check which users you have here. You can download the log and see what other errors you have. But right now we have one user which has to go through. We'll wait. So the auto provisioning is set up, and the next step is to deal with the federation. To do that, at first, let's grab the security settings for SAML from the Google side. And I think there are two ways. You can go to security settings and find it there, or in the app itself, you can download the metadata file. So for example, in my case, I'm going to download it directly from the app. So this will create an XML file, which you'll have to, by the way, confirm that you keep it in some browsers because it looks like a possible virus. Let's see, it goes into my download folder. Here it is. This is actually a file with all the necessary settings and also your certificate. So now we have to make federation, and we do it through PowerShell. I actually have the script for that, and you can find it in the description of the video. So you don't have to bother too much typing it, but you must have the MS Online module installed. This is a PowerShell module which will let you use other commands. And one important fact is that once you set these settings, so the actual command is Set-MsolDomainAuthentication. If you run this command again with different settings, they will not reapply. So you can only set the domain authentication settings once. It is very important because maybe your specific certificate expires and you want to use another one. You cannot just go and modify this with a different script. The trick is that you have to undo federation. So where you set your domain as authentication managed, and then you can reapply the settings. This is something I found the hard way because I was trying really hard to modify my settings. They wouldn't do that. So let's go. I'm actually going to do that with you, so you follow along. So at first we are going to install module MS Online. Then we import it in PowerShell. Import module MS Online. Let me actually make the text a bit bigger so it's easier to see. Here we go. All right. So the next command would be to connect to your tenant. Connect MSOL service, which will actually prompt your username and password. So let me do that. Okay, we are connected. Now we can check if we have the federation settings. Get, I think it's MSOL domain federation settings. And domain name is my domain. We don't have anything yet. And do not confuse these settings with the identity provider settings, which you have inside of your, where is it? I think it was this. Do not confuse with identity providers here. So these are the settings which you don't need. This is for typically API developed apps and other things similar to that. So no, you need the federation configured, and it's possible to do it with Powershell only, as far as I know. So the next command is to actually parse the content of the file you downloaded, which is in my case in my downloads section, this one, Google IDP metadata. So let me do that. So I'll parse it as XML. I will load in the IDP variable, and it will be the get content, and then my file path, e downloads. You can press tab if you want to type faster. It will fill in the missing letters. E downloads, and then what was it? I think it was Google IDP metadata. Yeah. So now it is inside of this IDP variable as an XML file. Okay. So the other commands are just parsing it. So it's getting them out of this file. So I'm just going to simply run them one after another. I just have to copy paste them properly, and that's it. Nope, not like that. Hold on. Okay. So the last command is to actually set authentication using these variables which we parsed. It will use a domain name, which I don't have yet. So let me fix that. My domain name is actually the domain that I just added to Office from Google. And you have to use quotation marks because it's a string value. Okay, so let's try this again. We need to run the last command. I haven't done it yet because if I would do it and make a mistake, then I would have to undo and redo it, which is not very useful if you're trying to do it fast. Okay, now we can recheck that we have the settings. They are here. So now we have federation object created, which means that now the app should be able to log in. We just need to wait for the provisioning to happen. So hopefully that's working. It's a bit funny because you can't really tell how long do you have to wait until the synchronization happens. For example, while I was waiting, I made another user, and the second user got synchronized first. So now I have this user available, but I can't modify the password. For example, if I try to reset the password, I should get an error that I cannot do that because it's managed by federated domain. So let me actually test this. So I'm going to click test SAML login and use the new user. Which actually give me something else because it's my new account. So let me make a new proper password. Hold on. I forgot about this feature. It will ask you to change the password. All right. But now this user exists on Google side. And we also log in with this user, as you can see, already on Microsoft. So after we go through default verification stage, which will probably ask me one more time, it wants me to use two-factor authentication. It really wants me to use two-factor authentication. Now, as you can see, my user is in the office. I don't have any licenses assigned, but if I go to Microsoft Office Admin Center, I can click on Manage Product Licenses and give this user the Microsoft license. Which means that after they relog in, after a bit, they should receive the apps. You can also configure auto license assignment in Azure AD portal. As you can see, everything is working. There's a user which has a license, which can log in into Office, but this user comes from Google domain. It has nothing to do with users on Admin Center. If I go and make new users in Google Admin Console, after a bit, they will get synchronized and appear in the Microsoft Home. So, as you can see, technically it's not that difficult, but on another hand, if you don't follow all the necessary steps, you'll get a lot of errors trying to log in. I hope it helps somebody to understand how to configure SAML in general, And I hope it especially helps those people who try to configure this for their organization because they have to use both clouds. I thank you for listening, I thank you for watching, and expect more videos from me in the future because now I have moved into a new apartment and I have some time to work on videos again. I wish you a great weekend, I wish you a great day, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.